And the Prime Minister said, excuse me, dear King, Kyong Tai Kung, your ancestor Zhao Menwang said, laid down the law, there's no war of aggression. If we start a war of aggression, heaven will give it to us. But he did. He crossed the Han River, and while crossing the Han River, he drowned. Suddenly the snow melted, he drowned. And after that, all the other dukes looked around and said, excuse me, we thought the mandate of heaven and the Zhao kings were going to last forever, and they were all perfect people, the ancestors, they were all divine. This guy got aggressive, got drowned. People started asking questions. People started saying, guys, are these guys deserving to be emperor? So what happened was the dukes started developing their own army, their own kingdom, and by the time the barbarians started attacking the Zhao dynasty, they were already very greatly weakened. And there's a guy called Zhao Ping Wang. He had to remove from his capital because the barbarians overran his capital. Most of the dukes held back and said, let's watch this. They got overran, so King Ping had to run across to the eastern side and form a new capital at Lok Yong. And when he went over there, there was a great duke called Chai Kok, which is northern Shandong province. The Duke of Chai gave protection, drove back the barbarians, called all the lords together and said, hey guys, this is our king. We can't let him be overrun by the barbarians. So Duke of Chai became the first hegemon, or Pa. There were many more Pa after that, but he was the best Pa. He was a true leader of all the barons, make them swear loyalty to the king and remain loyal to the king. He was a good man. But after that, the Pas were not so good already. And in fact, the king of Zhao was already beginning to be weaker and smaller, and all the dukes, especially the top 12 dukes, they made the decisions on behalf of the king. So the top 12 dukes are called Sub Yi Ji Hao. They were the 12 most senior and powerful dukes. They actually ran the show. And then after they decided something, they asked the king to sign, and the king signs. But having said that, they still respected him as the big king and they are the small king. So when they are about to die, they appoint their son, they still go back to the Zhao king and get a stamp and have a ceremony together and so forth. All right, so decentralization started weakening. The people started to question the king. People started to assume the dukes call themselves kings. In fact, by the spring and autumn period is actually a name from a book purportedly written by Confucius himself, describing the history of China, especially his own state, Lu, from the period of 700 plus to about 400 plus near the end of his life. That period of 300 years or so is the spring and autumn period. And during the spring and autumn period, all the dukes started breaking up and having their own sort of fiefdoms and started handing out titles, handing out land to their own relatives. In fact, there were almost 300 separate autonomous mini dukes and dukes all over the place, and marquis and barons, almost 300. And by the end of that period, the warring period, which is still Zhao, there's the three periods: there's the early Zhao, there's the spring and autumn, and after spring and autumn, there's the warring period. Warring period we'll do next time, but by the time warring period came around, there were only 7 kingdoms left. And eventually, of course, Qin Shi Huangdi's state took over the other 6. But before we get to that, there's this very remarkable person that we must talk about. Let me sort of spin off the sort of main track of discussion and go for a walk on the wild side. One of the things that I find the Chinese people most associated with around the world is their academic excellence. It's wherever I went, wherever I studied in the best schools and universities, whenever somebody pulls me out and takes me to the professor or to the dean or whatever, says this guy came first, and looks at me and he says Chinese expected. Why do you think people think like that? And who have you got to thank for? Seriously, when I was back, when I was in my school days, uni days, I attended the best universities in UK and US, and a lot of people there were speaking Cantonese because they came from Hong Kong. The last 10 years, 15 years, I went back to these places again. They're all speaking Shanghainese as well as Cantonese, Beijingese accent, more and more, different dialects. Sichuanese in the other end, Hunanese, Why? Why? I think if you want to thank anybody, if you want to give the credit, the man I'm going to talk about tonight, Confucius, truly a great sage. We have to thank him for making us a really intellectual people, an intellectual force to be reckoned with. All right, let's go and have a quick peekaboo at Confucius and what he was all about. A little bit of history about him. Confucius' father was an outstanding general. Not many people know that. In fact, his father was so strong that in a couple of wars that he fought, his father found that the castle gate didn't come down, no matter how much battering ram and shooting and ramming. So he says, this job's called for a real man. And he punched his way through the wall. He punched his way through the gate. And there was one instant when the gates were so deeply, rooted into the ground, the poles, that even hitting them, they won't go down. So he lifted them. This is how strong he was. He was called Old Iron Fist or Iron Hands. He had hands like pillars. This is Confucius' father. Now, if you want to know whether there's any physical connection with Confucius, Confucius was 6'3". He had shoulders like this. This is true. But he was a gentle giant. Of course, he had a huge head as well. They say his head looked like an oversized peach with a cliff in it. When his father was in a loveless marriage by arrangement, and his first wife gave him no kids, couldn't bear any children. Then his father had a concubine, and she gave him a crippled child. So the father was really deadly worried. He says, my next generation can't be like this. So one day his father in his 50s rode down to the countryside. This was the day of the temple fair. It was a big thing, temple fair. Temple fair was when all the family went out there, it's a big celebration. So he went out, had a big ride into the countryside, and was feeling really depressed. And then there was this young girl, she was 16. That's Confucius' mother. And she had never been to the temple fair. And Confucius' father was desperate for a son. So he says, how would you like to go to the temple fair? And before the girl had a chance to say abracadabra, or I want to talk to my mother first, they were off to the temple fair. They had a great time. He was taking her back home. It was late in the evening, and he says, can you do me a favor? I need a son. And she's like, what do you mean? Well, they had the Chinese call it ye hap, which means illicit relationship. And the modern term is one night stand. She didn't see him again, and he was born without a father. Now, in those days, it was really, really rough. 2,600 odd years ago, really rough not to have a father. He was teased endlessly. But by the time he was 3 years old, the mother decided to bring him to see the father because she had run out of money, run out of everything. So she went and hunted the father down, but somebody had poisoned the father, and the father was at his deathbed. And the father died, held Confucius' hand, died, but the first wife didn't allow this Confucius and the mother to attend the wedding, the funeral, sorry. And so they never knew where the father was buried. And Confucius had a rough old time. Wherever he went, people called him a wild pumpkin, which really meant you don't have a father. And, when eventually Confucius reached the age of 5, his mother took him out for town, and mother was sort of working herself blind, as a seamstress, doing all kinds of work, needlework, 5 jobs a day and night in insufficient light because she needed support. She was a single widow. She was very young. So anyway, Confucius was 5 and he was taken through town, and he saw this elaborate ceremony, and he stopped and told his mother, I don't want to go anywhere. So he watched the ceremony for like 5 hours, and what are we doing? There was a huge ceremony because in all those days there were, all kinds of rites and ceremonies on spiritual days or national days. And he watched all that. Then after that, he said, can go home. So when mother took him home, he actually put all the stones and reenacted the whole rite. For a 5-year-old kid, that's huge. But when he was 7, he started doing pottery, and he actually reenacted all this with the right vessels. He made the vessels himself. He was so interested in this lai. Lai is at the heart of Confucius' teaching. Let me step forward now. Confucius' curriculum. Confucius' curriculum consists of 6 subjects in descending order of importance. The first is lai. Lai is relationship, custom, rites to be performed at funerals, to be performed when you see the king, how to bow correctly. When you look at a woman, how to look at her correctly. When somebody drives a chariot past you and you're driving another chariot, how to bow, how to stop, how to greet your teacher, how to greet your elder brother, how to greet your sister-in-law, your father, your mother. Interpersonal relationship at the highest level. Now some of you might say, Sifu, how is that relevant today? It is extremely relevant. Let me tell you. Because so many people don't know how to look at each other, they start fights. So many people don't know how to drive cars and give way, they have accidents. Behavior was such a refined state under the Zhao kings that Confucius put it number one. If you want to re-establish that contractual relationship between man and heaven, you better learn about rights. This is number one, teaching rights and customs. Number two, music. The music was so profound that it can change the nature of man. He had used music to lift the intelligence level of his students. He has used music to change the nature of his students from being aggressive to being soft and gentle. So one is rights, two is music. These two have divine influences, have spiritual influences. Number three, he taught archery. Number four, he taught charioting. Archery and charioting on the superficial level trains you at the physical aspect of life. Archery requires you to learn breathing, qigong, concentration, gives you strength, gives you willpower. It's a form of jamzhong, doing the correct arrow archery. Confucius is one of the greatest archers ever. Amazing, isn't it? Also one of the greatest charioteers. Number five and number six. Number five is calligraphy, writing. Number six is mathematics. Now, calligraphy and mathematics allows you to operate within the world, human-to-human relationship. If you want to advance yourself in your career, you want to teach, you want to be in those days, if you were not born a lord, you want to work as a housekeeper of the lord. So you're a number two, you can run the whole household, the budget. You need mathematics. Mathematics included accounting, bookkeeping, and so forth. If you wanted to run an army's provisions, you still need the mathematics. And it will further your intelligence. You need it. Number five, calligraphy, because even the kings need to be taught how to write beautiful characters, how to express themselves, how to show their wisdom, how to show their self-control and patience through calligraphy. So these are the six noble arts that he taught. And he excelled in all six of them. Excelled. Any one of them, if you reach the level that he did, you are rightfully considered a genius. But to excel at all six of them and teach them with the kind of passion that he did, unmatched. This man is in a total class of his own. Even to today, I cannot think of any degree, diploma, certificate, course in the world that has these six elements, even in its modern form, taught. So that's how holistic, how comprehensive, how important it was. If you compare it to the lords and noblemen of the day there and around the world, Confucius was in a class of his own. But he's not just a teacher. You got to remember, he wanted to bring back the best of the Zhao dynasty to the China of his time. And the way to do it was, he realized that genetics can only play a role to a certain extent. The Zhao kings were great for 4 generations. They were fantastic, untouchable. Nobody could touch them. But didn't work on the 5th and 6th generation and subsequent generations. So you can't depend on genetics alone. So the concept of Guanji, or superior man or gentleman, lasted only so long genetically. So what he wanted to do was, he wanted to first lift the spec of what a Guanji is by teaching these 6 things. This is what Zhao Men Wang could do, Zhao Mo Wang could do, Zhao Seng Wang, Zhao Gong Dan, Zhao Hong Wang could do, but after that, no. So he wanted to teach these 6 at the highest level. So he's actually lifting the concept of what a Guanji is, lifting the spec. But secondly, and just as importantly, he's thrown it open to the masses. Because his students included slaves. He taught slaves. He taught people so poor they used to eat from the garbage dump. He taught people who had never eaten for weeks. He wanted to make Guanji out of a guy who's a street urchin, who was undernourished, ready to die. So this is the greatness of the man. That the nobleman, the concept of the Guanji, was no longer designated through genes, by birth.